All right. So thanks everybody so much for coming today. We're here to do the Know the Signs Suicide Prevention presentation. My name is Toby Gavon. I'm a health education coordinator with Nevada County Department of Public Health, and I'm also the county suicide prevention coordinator. So during our presentation, just to get started, for folks, we do have interpretation in Spanish that's available. Special thanks to Coco and to Reina, who are going to be our interpreters for this evening. We have a slide right here that kind of walks you through how to access interpretation. But at the bottom of the screen, you should see that little interpretation icon. Click on that, choose the English to Spanish for interpretation. What you're going to hear is volume at 80% for Spanish, and then you're going to hear 20% in English, so you can hear the tone of the folks who are talking. If you just want to hear only the Spanish interpretation, you just have to click on the mute original audio button, and then you should be able to just hear Spanish only, and you won't hear a little bit of that English in the background. So just give folks a second to do that. Okay, great. And we're getting confirmation that folks can hear, well, it sounds like somebody's hearing me at higher, but and the Spanish at lower. It should be the other way around. And then there's also in the chat, if you scroll up to the very top, I've included some resources, and you can also, we have the presentation slides available in Spanish. So if folks want to go to the link that's in the chat box at the very top, so just scroll up to the top there, and you will be able to find that and follow along with the Spanish language version of the slides. All right, so before we get started, because this is a suicide prevention training, sometimes when we have discussions and talk about the topic of suicide, it can bring up past experiences that we've had or other people in our lives have had around suicide. And so generally when we do suicide prevention trainings, we like to do those in person as much as possible, but given the situation in the world right now, we're not able to do that. So we do have some really great resources that are available, so that if at any point in time during the presentation and the training, you feel like you need additional support, we have some resources that are available. So we have the local crisis line that's available at 530-265-5811. We have the National Lifeline, which is available at 800-273-8255. And then we have the Spanish National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-888-628-9454. We also have crisis text by texting HOME to 741-741, or for Spanish, you can also text Ayuda to 741-741. As you guys came on, you probably saw that the training is being recorded. For folks who weren't here when we initially made the announcement, nobody outside of the hosts can see who's in the audience. So everybody is muted, everybody's video is off. So you do have anonymity here on the webinar. And we also have a virtual support room. So if you go into the chat again, there's a virtual support room. I'm just going to retype in how to get there. There we go. The virtual support room right there. So that's just a room. It's a separate Zoom meeting from the meeting that we're having right now. And that meeting, that is a place that if you need additional support at any point in time during the training, you can go into that virtual meeting room. We have 2 clinicians who are there, including a bilingual clinician who can help and support people during this time. So if at any point in time you need additional support, please feel free to go there. And then we also have anonymous Q&A. So if you go to the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen and you click on that, you can click on the send anonymously, like you can see at the bottom of this slide right here. And that will send an anonymous question to us here, and we'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout the presentation and answering questions as we go. I did see I did see that somebody mentioned in the chat that folks are still having difficulty with the Spanish interpretation. Could somebody confirm that that's still happening, or is that working now?
It's still not working well.
It's still not working well. Okay.
Toby, your voice is much louder than Coco's.
Okay. Let me see if there is anything we can do here. It's supposed to, if you click on mute original audio, it's still not being helpful. Can you only hear Spanish language interpretation when you click mute original audio?
Toby, is there any way that you could perhaps be in the interpretation?
You can hear both English. You can hear Toby and then Coco.
Even when you say click, you say mute original audio?
Yeah.
Okay.
It might be, we might want to do the old fashioned sign out, then sign back in. Sometimes that works for participants, not to re-trigger the interpretation.
Yeah, why don't we do that for folks who are using the interpretation? Not sure why we're having challenges with that. As I mentioned before, we practiced that beforehand to make sure that it was working all right. So if folks just want to kind of sign out, we'll hold on for a second, sign out, sign back in, and see if that will improve the interpretation, because we really want to make sure that it's accessible. Yeah.
Toby, do you want Coco to sign out and try again? In case
I would say
I think Coco's interpretation is, well, I don't know, sorry.
I would try just having folks who are attending sign out first and then come back and join us. Again, apologies, folks, for the technical difficulties. It would not be a virtual training without them, but we want to make sure that folks are able to hear. So we'll give folks like 30 seconds to kind of jump off and then jump back on. I'm still louder.
¿Sí me escuchas? A ver, a lo mejor tengo que ponerme ese más aquí en la boca.
Okay, I can hear you now, Coco.
Oh, okay. ¿Sí me escucha?
Yeah, we can still hear. Yeah, I'm still louder. Apologies, folks. There isn't an option to change to change mine, unfortunately. Is it yeah, I'm checking my settings, but is that better at all for people? Is my volume lower?
I'm in Spanish right now, and you're much louder than Coco.
I'm much louder. All right.
Yes, I can hear you, Coco.
You can hear Coco?
Yeah, I'm in the Spanish version, Spanish portal.
When Shannon talks, are you guys also hearing her?
Coco, can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can hear both of you very clearly, and then Coco after you to Shannon and Toby talk.
Okay. I'm not sure why it's doing that.
Toby,
yep.
One fix for maybe right now is for the speaker to make a statement and then pause so that Coco can translate.
Okay. Well, let's do that. So Let's try to slow it down a little bit just to improve that.
So for the speakers, if you guys want to put it into Spanish, you'll be able to hear Coco, and that might help with the flow.
All right. All right. So we're going to go forward. We're just going to slow it down a little bit to try to make compensate for the interpretation challenges that we're having. So before we get started with the training, I wanted to welcome Supervisor Hardy Bullock, who represents Nevada County District 5 on the Nevada County Board of Supervisors. It was actually Supervisor Bullock who originally reached out to me a couple months back about having this training. So a huge thank you to him for seeing this as a key priority, and just wanted to welcome him up here to say a quick welcome. So Supervisor Bullock, if you could join us up here, unmute yourself, that'd be great.
Okay. Can you hear me okay, Toby? All right. So I just wanted to thank everybody for coming tonight. I appreciate your attendance here. I know life is busy, so I'm glad that you are here. I'm your elected Nevada County representative for the 5th district here that runs from the Nevada state line down to Nevada City and then north to Sierra County and south to Placer County. So it's an honor to represent you and to be a part of the county team. I want to also thank our partners for putting all this together tonight, the Truckee-Tahoe Suicide Prevention Coalition, the Sierra Community House, the Speedy Foundation, Tahoe Forest Health Systems, the Truckee-Tahoe Community Foundation, and of course our staff, Toby and all the other team members on the county, Jasmine Bro and others who are here to support everybody tonight. So thank you for being here. So why are we here tonight? So we're here obviously to prevent the tragic loss of life. And that's basically the foundation of the principle of this work, is to prevent another loss of life in our community. We're here to understand and recognize the warning signs and understand how to find them, see them, identify them. We're also here to reduce the factors that contribute to suicide and also increase the factors that make us more resilient and make us stronger and more durable, particularly during this time of COVID and the pandemic and all the challenges that we face right now. I wanted to talk just briefly about why I'm here and why I asked Toby to put this training together. So we had a loss from suicide in our family about 5 years ago, and it was incredibly difficult time period for us. And I know that many people on this call have probably known somebody or had a family member or been involved in a loss of that nature. And I just wanted to reach my hand out and say that we support you, our community supports you. I have 2 children that went to Truckee-Tahoe High School, and they've lost friends to suicide. The conversations we had as a community and as a family about that were incredibly difficult. So we're here to say that it's okay to have a tough conversation about this topic. And that's, again, why we're here tonight, to have a conversation to prevent additional loss. I think I want to mention that I think we're asking a lot of our community today. It's been a really difficult and trying period for many people. Mental health is a priority in our community, and it's really difficult to maintain that in virtual meetings and having our friendships and our family connections and our connections to our community just disrupted through the pandemic. We're asking a lot of our teens and our young adults, and I think it's really important right now to focus on what we can control, and what we can control is training, support, and outreach through our community channels we have here tonight. I also wanted to let you know that the leaders in your community support you, and that we're thinking about ways to help you and guide you through this difficult process. And so anybody on this call is a leader in our community. You can reach out to them. You can reach out to Nevada County. You can reach out to the trusted people in your life that you consider a leader and ask for help. And I would also mention that please just be courageous enough to have a difficult conversation, because it could mean the world to somebody. And I just encourage you to do that. And I just, again, really honored to serve you and happy to be here tonight. So I hope everybody gets a lot out of this training. Back to you, Toby.
Great. Thank you so much, Supervisor Bullock. Really appreciate it. And thanks for your leadership. I now wanted to turn it over to Chelsea Roth, who's a pediatric behavioral health intensivist with Tahoe Forest Behavioral Health. And Chelsea's going to give us a little bit of an introduction into suicide prevention, what it is, and then share some
Entonces
local
ahora vamos a presentar
data
a
and
Chelsea Roth, que
trends.
ella es una consejera de aquí del.
Reina, we can hear you on the main channel. Not sure why it's doing that.
I'm on the Spanish.
Yeah, I think it's given us problems tonight. It sounds like it was working better before based on the chat, what folks were saying.
Okay.
Here, Reina, I'll try to, if you could hop out, let me see if I can resend the invitation while Chelsea's talking and get you set up correctly.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So Chelsea, I'm going to turn it over to you. And again, apologies to everybody for the challenges that we're having with the interpretation.
That's okay. Thank you so much for having me. As Toby mentioned, I work with Tahoe Forest Health System, and I'm with our behavioral health department. I am our pediatric therapist, and I work with alongside our pediatric team, composed of our youth health navigator, our nurse case manager, dietitian, and then also our adult team as well. And we have been onboarding new therapists and really excited to be adding to the resources in our community. So I'm gonna just go into some basics about what suicide prevention is and introduce this topic. Supervisor Bullock kind of already mentioned a good amount of the key points on this particular slide. But I just wanted to start by saying that this is a very difficult topic. And just a thank you for everyone who is participating in this talk right now and who has logged on. And whether you're doing that for reasons because this is affecting you personally or someone you know, or if you just want to gain more information, thank you for doing that. Hopefully you take something away today. So again, we're going to be talking about recognizing the warning signs, getting a sense of, you know, whether it's within yourself or someone else, the things to pay attention to, when to take them seriously, and how then to reduce the factors that increase the risk for yourself, other people, and how to increase factors to promote that resilience that Supervisor Bullock mentioned as well. How do we provide some more protective factors for yourself, that other person, someone in the community? And it really is important to help save a life. And literally just that, suicide can be preventable as long as we take the time to recognize what it really looks like for people. So I'm going to share with you some of the things we're doing currently in the hospital and in our primary care clinics. What we have in front of us right now on the screen is our depression screening. This is a form called the PHQ-9. And I apologize that it's sort of small, but I'll go over the questions that we ask just so that you can familiarize yourself with some of the ways that we screen for depression here locally. And this is, I should note that this is a very common form that's used in many practices. And it's used usually during like in the pediatric office during a well child visit. It's also used in another primary care setting, typically for just kind of any visit. If there's, it's turning into a standard questionnaire, but also something that our clinicians are using if they're concerned. So it's composed of 9 questions. First one is, and it's all on a scale of 0 to 3. And it's capturing basically the last 2 weeks in someone's life, how they're feeling. So we're asking if you felt little interest or pleasure in doing things, if you felt down, depressed, or hopeless. We ask about sleep. Do you have trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, sleeping too much? If you're feeling tired or having little energy. If you have a poor appetite or if you're overeating. If you're feeling bad about yourself, like you're a failure or you've let your family down. If you're having trouble concentrating on things, such as reading the newspaper, watching TV. If you're moving or speaking so slowly people could have noticed, so kind of being really sluggish, or the opposite, being fidgety and restless, more than usual. And then finally, the key question here is thoughts that you would be better off dead or of hurting yourself in some way. And again, these are based on a scale, an answer of 0 to 3. And then those results of this screen will let us know if a referral to our behavioral health department is needed for further assessment and support. So that's what that screening looks like. Our next slide is some numbers we have based on these screenings. You can go to the next slide. So these are our most recent numbers here. As you can see, this we're starting to track it back in 2019. And I will say that these numbers, along with these numbers, what coincides with this is the hospital's effort to really make these screenings happen and make them a standard of practice in our primary cares. And so basically what we're seeing is that blue line is our adult population who are screened. And that averages about 49% of adults who, that's 49% of people who have attended a doctor visit of some sort. And then the green line is our youth 12 to 17, and that's 43% of recorded visits who had been screened. And it looks like, basically our adult line, as you can see, has been fairly consistent through the last couple of years. No huge changes, but what is most concerning is that green line for our youth. And, it definitely seems to coincide if you look at the dates with when our pandemic started, but it also, again, coincides with us tracking and really trying to make a point to make these screens happen. So that's a concerning trend, upward trend, but it's also something we're seeing nationally as well. And Toby asked me to speak a little bit to just kind of some other trends that we're seeing, and I thought I would just quite literally take these things that I'm hearing directly in the therapy office, that I'm hearing directly from youth, as to where some of these symptoms might be coming from, where these stressors occur. Now, certainly with the pandemic, school stress, pressure to try and perform despite online learning is a huge one, but also relationship issues, whether it's coming out of the isolation from distance learning, or having to quarantine with siblings or parents, and lots of things have come out of that as well. We're seeing a ton of social anxiety, so kids who just are transitioning back to school and having a hard time being around a lot of people in crowds, not really knowing how to socialize as much anymore. Seeing sports pressures, as we all know, sports were taken out of the equation for a while and then back in, and that's also kind of gone back and forth. So I hear a lot about how that physical exercise and activity has been hard to maintain. Social media is a big one. Lots of screen time that I think has really increased a lot of that social anxiety, bullying, certainly. And then I'm seeing a lot as well of gender identity, sexuality, questioning, and so that's also been a very big topic. One thing I didn't mention in here that I should mention is also we're seeing a good amount of disordered eating disorders as well lately coming out of the pandemic. So these are all just some key points that I wanted to highlight on the youth that I work with. And I also just wanted to say that, again, thank you for being a part of this talk. And as a community, I'm hoping that we can all work together to help our youth, certainly in particular, but just help each other just by knowing the signs. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Chelsea. Thanks for giving us a little bit of an introduction to suicide prevention and some of the local trends and data that we're seeing right now through the Tahoe Forest Health System. Really appreciate that. I did want to acknowledge, it sounds like through the chat functionality that there are continuing to be some issues with the interpretation. So just want to extend our sincerest apologies that technology does not seem to be working well right now. After the webinar tonight, we'll make sure that we record a Spanish language version of this one as well, so that we can share that with folks too. Now we're going to hop into the training portion of the agenda. And so with the training, we're going to be covering know the signs. So what are the warning signs of suicide? Finding the words. So when we've noticed the warning signs in somebody or we're concerned about somebody, how do we reach out? How do we talk to them? How do we ask them about suicide? We'll then be covering reach out, which is really about, what are some of the resources that are available to folks within the community. We have a lot of local resources. We also have some national resources that folks can go to. I'm also going to be sharing some risk and protective factors within Know the Signs. And within the resources, we're going to cover school-based resources, community-based resources, and then we'll also share a little bit about the suicide prevention coalition locally that's doing some great work. And then we'll have time for questions as well at the end. But if at any point in time anybody has any questions, please feel free to put those into the Q&A or to put those into the chat, and we will make sure that we address those. I see that I think there's already a question in there just about like what the impact of social media like TikTok might be for folks. And so we'll get, I think we'll go through the signs and we're actually gonna talk a little bit about kind of social media a little bit, and we can kind of address that topic then. All right, so let's dive in. So with the Know the Signs, a lot of the information that we're going to be covering is also available on the website, the Know the Signs website. Know the Signs is a statewide campaign from Each Mind Matters, which is funded through the Mental Health Services Act, and it has a wealth of information. So we're going to be covering a lot of ground tonight. We're going to be covering a lot of signs. We're going to be covering a lot of information. If you ever forget anything that we're telling you tonight, which is very likely, you can just go to suicideispreventable.org. It's a fantastic website. It has a lot of the information. And there's also a Spanish language version of the website as well at elsuicidio.es prevenible.org. .org, where they have all the same information translated into Spanish. All right. So with knowing the signs, we're going to cover a few buckets of signs. The first one that we're going to cover is critical signs, which is highlighted red here just because if we see any of these signs, we really want to seek immediate help for that person. Talking about death and suicide, changes in mood and changes in behavior. And with both of these, what you'll notice is the word changes. And when we talk about the warning signs of suicide, that's really what we're talking about, is looking for changes in people's mood, people's behavior, the way that people are presenting themselves to the world. And oftentimes it's the people that are closest to somebody, so friends, colleagues, classmates, who are the most likely ones to notice these signs. We'll also cover expressions of hopelessness and desperation, and then we'll also go over putting affairs in order. All right, just checking the Q&A quickly there. So when you see the following signs, you really want to seek immediate help. Talking about death or suicide, and I'm going to cover that in a lot more detail on the next slide. Seeking methods for self-harm, such as searching online or obtaining a gun. And this one's actually a really good example. So for each person, you know, the journey that they're on that brings them to experiencing thoughts of suicide is going to be different. And just like that journey is different, so is the signs that you're going to notice in them. So with this example, for instance, of somebody obtaining a gun, you know, if somebody's an avid hunter, they already own a lot of guns, then maybe obtaining a gun would not be something that would raise concern. However, if somebody's never expressed interest in obtaining a gun or having a gun, and all of a sudden there's a real sense of urgency around that or a real focus on that, then that might be a sign. So with each of these, right, they're all going to be contextual to that individual person, but that's just one example of how it can be very different depending on who the person is. And then talking about feeling hopeless or having no reason to live. Another theme that we're going to be covering here in the signs is really the sense of connectedness and belonging. Chelsea mentioned earlier, you know, we really want to build up that resilience for people, those protective factors. And one of the major protective factors we have is a sense of connection or a sense of belonging, you know, whether that's to an activity, whether that's to a group of people or a person, whatever it is, that sense of connection, that sense of belonging is really, really important. So when somebody loses that, you know, we get really concerned. All right, so with talking about death and suicide, the statements might be subtle or vague. You know, in our culture, there's a lot of stigma surrounding mental health and suicide prevention and suicide in general. You know, for a lot of us, you know, we have difficulty even saying the word. And so it can be really difficult for people to have open and honest conversations about suicide. And so it may be subtle, you know, it may be something like, I just want it all to end, or I want everything to go away, right? So in many situations, it could be a subtle or vague way of them talking or referencing death or suicide. The statements may also be direct or even literal, right? People may say directly to you, I'm going to kill myself, or I'm thinking about suicide. Things would be a lot easier when it comes to suicide prevention if folks could have open and honest conversations about suicide and speak directly about how they're feeling. And that's one of the reasons why tonight's training is so important too, is just so that we can all get a little bit more comfortable having these open and honest conversations about suicide. And then the thoughts of suicide or death may be reflected in something written, drawn, or posted on social media. So every way that we have of communicating as people are ways that we can notice the signs. So there are certain things, right, that we're going to be able to see with our eyes. There are certain things that we're going to be able to hear that somebody says. There are things that we can feel, right? Our intuition or that sense that, you know, something's wrong. And then there's also things that we can learn, you know, either about their own personal history or about their life circumstances that can be a sign. And so in the same way that we have all those different ways that people can demonstrate signs, people can also communicate them. So it could be that somebody writes a note, or maybe they do a journal, or they're doing poetry, and they're talking about death, they're talking about suicide. Maybe it's on social media, they're posting, vague or direct statements alluding to death or suicide. So these are all ways that people can talk about or communicate about death and suicide that we want to be aware of, and we want to be responding to. So changes in mood, somebody being uncharacteristically sad or depressed, or unusually happy or content after a period of significant depression. Now, with the first one, I think when we think about suicide, we oftentimes think about this uncharacteristic sadness or depression, right? And we're thinking about, if you think of it as a continuum, right? Mood as a continuum, seeing a dramatic shift, right? Sometimes we feel great, we feel positive, and we present ourselves to the world that way. And then in other times, we may not have that energy, right? We may not be as happy, and people can kind of sense that. So anytime we see a significant shift along that continuum, where somebody's feeling uncharacteristically sad or depressed, that's something that we want to notice. In addition, with the unusually happy or content, it may be a little bit surprising, because I think for a lot of us, we think about, hey, we want people to be happy. We want people to be content. But what can happen is when we see a shift, when somebody's really feeling really down, and then all of a sudden they're really happy or content, what can happen is somebody might be struggling for a very long time with thoughts of suicide. They may be thinking about it, and that's why it presents as being uncharacteristically sad or depressed. But when they make a decision, they may make a decision that, yes, in fact, I do want to follow through on these thoughts of suicide. I do want to die. Sometimes that can feel like a burden has been lifted from them, and they're content with their decision. They're happy with their decision. They're at peace. And so that struggle that they've been experiencing is no longer there. And so we also want to notice when there's that dramatic shift into somebody being unusually happy or content after a period of significant depression. Other signs, uncontrolled anger, expressing or acting in ways that reflect hostility, bitterness, resentment, or rage, talking about seeking revenge. With youth in particular, something that's been brought up in a number of trainings that I've done and talking to school counselors is this idea of irritability, where they're just, youth are very irritable as a sign. So again, for each one of us, it's going to present itself in a different way, but really doing that. And so I see that somebody's raising their hand in the audience. If folks do have a question, you can put that in the Q&A, or if you have a question or comment that's just for the hosts and the panelists, you can also put that in the chat as well, or you can put it in the chat. You can do it anonymously through the Q&A, but there isn't, we're not going to be unmuting folks as we go through this. So with changes in behavior, so there's careless behavior. And so we think of this in two different ways. So there's caring less. So people stop talking to and doing things with others, or stop doing activities they once enjoyed. And so for a lot of us, right, we change interests, we change groups of friends, especially when we're thinking about young people, right? We have different interests. Switching interests or switching groups of friends isn't inherently a sign. What we're really thinking about is when somebody has some sort of activity or thing that they like to do that brings them that sense of community, connectedness, and belonging. And then all of a sudden they're withdrawing from that activity or those people, and they're not replacing it with anything else. So they're really isolating themselves, in that particular instance. So there's kind of that caring less about those activities that they enjoy or the people they enjoy. And then there's also just careless, right? And so not really thinking about the short or the long-term consequences of their actions. So spending money recklessly, increased use of alcohol or drugs. And again, thinking of this as a continuum, right? It could be that somebody uses alcohol or drugs moderately, but all of a sudden there's a dramatic shift in their behavior where their use is a lot more extreme, and they don't really seem to care at all about what the consequences of that use might be. It could be that somebody hasn't used alcohol or drugs in a long time or ever, and then all of a sudden they start using. So just thinking about it as an increase along that continuum of their use of alcohol or drugs. And then sleeping more or can't sleep, seeming restless, appearing shaken or worried, anxious, and oftentimes that, that anxiety is what results in either the lack of sleep or a lot of sleep and them feeling restless. Just going to stop for a second and check right here, just to make sure that we are, it sounds like folks are responding to that. Thanks for everybody who's responding in the chat there. Really appreciate it. Expressions of hopelessness and despair. So, folks don't see how their life or situation could get better. And so in this particular instance, suicide becomes the way that they can escape, the problems, the challenges, oftentimes the pain or the loss that they're experiencing in their life. And for a lot of folks, they may not have ever talked to anybody else about how they're feeling, whether it's the challenges they're experiencing or never told anybody that they're experiencing thoughts of suicide or had anybody to brainstorm other solutions to the challenges that they're experiencing. They might talk about being a burden to others. And so this might be family, friends. It could just be a broad burden that they feel like they are to society. And for those who are closest to them, they may not be able to understand how somebody, how that person could feel that way, that they could feel like that type of burden. But for the person who's experiencing thoughts of suicide, that feeling is very real. And so that's how it may be expressed by them. No sense of purpose or statements hit at life being pointless. What is the point of it all, right? Expressions like that. So, and that sense of purpose and belonging is so important. And so again, when somebody loses that connection, they lose that sense of purpose, that sense of belonging, it's really important that we follow up and check in on that. So with putting affairs in order, it could be rushing to complete or revise a will, right? So putting together a will is something that many people do. But if there's some sort of urgency that can't be explained about why there's that urgency to put together a will, it might be a reason to talk to them a little bit. Giving away prized or favorite possessions. So these could be prized possessions in terms of, financially valuable, or they could just be things that have sentimental value to that person, right? So it could be a family heirloom that they're giving away. And that's their way of expressing love, to the people around them. And also in knowing that they don't feel like they're going to need that possession anymore when they're gone. We spend a lot of time online cultivating our online communities. And so it could be that somebody's giving away passwords to social media or to other online activities. And so, it could be like gaming, for instance, youth, young people and older folks as well, right? We can put a lot of time and energy into online gaming. And so if somebody's giving away their password to like social media, for instance, and there's not really a clear reason why they're doing that. It may be that they want somebody to be able to communicate with that broad online network, once they're gone. Pets is another one. We found that a lot of times people who have pets will reach out either to animal shelters or to family and friends, trying to find out what will happen if they're gone, who will take care of the pet, or what will happen at an animal shelter if their pet goes there. And then saying goodbye. Now, we all say goodbye in a lot of the interactions that we have, on any given day. But if somebody seems like they're reaching out very intentionally to a lot of the people around them to thank them for what they've meant to them in their lives, and that goodbye feels a little bit permanent, that may be a reason to follow up. And that could be in person, right? But especially now with COVID and the pandemic, it could be online, it could be via text message, it could be via email. So just trying, like when your gut gives you that sense that something may be off in the goodbye, that may be a reason to follow up as well. And so the next couple of slides that I'm going to cover are particular populations that we get a lot of questions about. For this forum, for instance, a lot of we're going to talk a lot about youth and some of the school-based resources that are available. But one of the things that I want folks to be thinking about is knowing the signs is so important because, while it may be likely that we're going to use this, maybe on a child that we have, or in recognizing the signs that maybe they may be demonstrating, we're equally as likely to be able to notice these things in colleagues, in friends, in family. And so we have this kind of these two populations here because we get a lot of questions about them. But one of the things that's really important for Know the Signs is making sure that we're focused on the signs and knowing what the warning signs are, instead of thinking about particular populations that may be more or less likely in our minds to experience thoughts of suicide or attempt suicide. And so I share these, we share these as kind of examples of particular populations, but as you'll see as we go through them, they can also apply to older folks as well. And there's a lot of overlap with some of the signs that we've touched on before. So with teens, complaints of physical pain often related to emotions. So it could be like a headache and a stomach ache. We think of those being related to anxiety in particular. Neglect of personal appearance, hygiene, and basic grooming. So, all of us present ourselves to the world differently. We spend different amounts of time, getting ready, getting dressed. And so if there's a change, right, thinking again as a continuum in terms of the way that somebody is presenting themselves to the world, that is something that we may be wanting to look for. And then showing a significant personality change. We talked about the changes in mood. We talked about those changes in behavior. And then a loss of interest in pleasurable activities they used to enjoy. Again, that isolation that we sometimes see. All right. I don't know, Kim, if there's anything that you would add just from the school perspective that you guys often see in terms of teens, teen warning signs, or anybody else. It doesn't just have to be Kim.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, we definitely see what you're talking about. A lot of times there'll be posts that we might see on like Snapchat, or they'll just say things that are concerning. And sometimes we'll even have friends to say, hey, I'm worried. My friend keeps talking about death or giving up or not being here anymore. And so one of our approaches has been really to try and train our students to be supports and to just really be aware of, like, to take all those comments seriously. Sometimes we even have teachers notice just things that they write. I think a lot of young people want to be heard and seen, and so they say things and it comes out, and to really take it seriously and pay attention to it.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Kim.
Can I just speak one more thing to
Chelsea.
that?
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say that I think, especially for our youth, a lot of times some of the signs can be mistaken for just, things that we tend to think are part of their development. So like the moody teenager, for example, oh, well, they're 15 now. So, that's just what they do. And so just wanted to mention that, I think oftentimes with youth, we tend to blame it on, a phase or, something that we just think is part of, their normal development or something. So just wanted to mention that as well.
I'd love to add on to that. What's Up Wellness, as well as the Speedy Foundation and Sierra Community House, all have the ability to provide youth mental health first aid trainings. So if you are a parent who is possibly concerned about what's the difference between typical adolescent development and that moodiness, the changes, the hormones and all, what's the difference between that and emerging mental health conditions or possible substance use. That would be a great training to go and learn and process and take home a resource with you.
Great. Thank you, Shannon. And thank you guys so much. Absolutely. All right. So next up, we're going to cover older adults, just because we do get a lot of questions about this. So persistent sadness, anxiety, and fatigue, a preoccupation with death. We talked about the saying goodbye. And I think one thing is we oftentimes associate suicide with emotional pain, right? But it can so often be connected to physical pain as well, right? And not being able to escape that physical pain. It could be ignoring medical advice from a doctor, right? So maybe there's a particular prescription that they have, or maybe there's a certain treatment that the doctor has asked them to do, and they're no longer following that. They're ignoring medical advice. We talked about the neglect of personal appearance, and then also looking for means for self-harm. And then one thing I just wanted to highlight on kind of looking for means to self-harm, we want to be aware of any means. So whether it's a firearm, whether it's pills, whether it's a particular location, whatever the means of self-harm are, but particularly access to firearms is really important. And it's really important to know that, because we know from the research that when somebody attempts suicide with a firearm, they die more than 80% of the time, whereas if they attempt suicide via poisoning, they die less than 2% of the time. So we want to take every means that somebody has access to very, very seriously. But if you see the signs in somebody and you know that they have access to firearms, that's one thing to be particularly aware of. And then I'm just going to cover some risk factors and protective factors. Chelsea did a great job of mentioning in her introduction to suicide prevention how some of the things that we really want to do is kind of reduce those risk factors that people have and lift up those protective factors, that resilience for folks. And so these are also things that you might be able to learn from somebody, whether it's about their past history, something that they're experiencing at any given time, that can also be a sign. So that includes a family history of suicide, personal history of suicide. We talked a little bit about substance use, trauma, isolation, impulsive or aggressive tendencies. And so with this, it's just, there's great classes that are out there, like conflict mediation classes, anger management classes, things like that. Some of us have been fortunate enough in our lives to be taught how to solve problems without violence or aggressiveness. And then other folks haven't had the same opportunity. So just thinking about that. Loss is so much a part of it as well. So it could be a relational loss. It could be a divorce that somebody's experiencing, or a breakup. It could be a friend, right? It could be somebody else that they've lost to suicide. It could be work, right? Loss of a job, or loss of the financial contributions that they're making, to their family. Loss is very much a part of it, as well as pain that we talk about so much. Access to lethal means, I mentioned firearms, physical illness, so that physical pain, and then barriers to care, which is unfortunately something that particularly in rural areas, we struggle with. And then so protective factors, the thing that we can do that we're going to talk about in the next slides that we cover is really, we want to connect somebody to effective clinical care for mental, physical, and substance use disorders. We want there to be easy access to clinical interventions and support. We want to build up that connectedness, with family, with community that we know is so important. We want supportive relationships with medical and mental health providers. We want those skills in problem solving, conflict resolution, and nonviolent ways of handling disputes, which is why conflict mediation and anger management and other related classes, those skill building classes, are so critical. And then cultural and religious beliefs that discourage suicide as well. And then the last slide. So for other considerations, trust your intuition. This is really something that with all the signs, right? Trust your gut. If your gut is telling you that there's something wrong, that something's just not right with somebody, follow up with them. The presence of one sign or multiple signs doesn't necessarily mean that someone is thinking about suicide. So it could be that somebody is demonstrating one sign in all of the categories that I talked about, but they're not thinking about suicide. It could be that they are only demonstrating one of the signs, or that we don't even notice the signs, but they are thinking about suicide. There's really only one way to find out whether somebody's thinking about suicide, and that is to ask the person if they're thinking about suicide, which is what Shannon is going to cover in the next section. Before we do that, I just want to pause and see, I know there was some questions that got answered here. All right, I'll slow down. Apologies for that. So we have a question for Shannon, I think, which is, when are the trainings that you mentioned, the mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid trainings? Do you know if there are any scheduled currently?
That's a great question. I'm getting ready to schedule some myself. I'm not sure. I haven't checked with What's Up Wellness. Kim, do you know if they have any that are coming up?
I'm not aware.
Okay. We can pull together some dates for some local trainings and share that as a follow-up resource.
For sure. And after this, after the presentation, I'm going to send out an email, and that email will go out to everybody who signed up, and it will include the slides from the presentation, both the English and the Spanish slides, and it'll also include a link to resources. And so I'll include information about What's Up Wellness. They have a training page where they include some of the trainings that they have that are coming up. And then I'll also, Shannon, if it's okay, include your contact information, since I know you provide those trainings as well. Thank you. And then I know Linnea, somebody had a question. What percent do you think may be due to social media, such as TikTok, et cetera? So when we talk about people who are experiencing thoughts of suicide, Shannon, I believe you might have answered that in the chat I saw. Is that correct? Or no?
No, I just encouraged more questions like that.
Oh, okay.
And I was going to ask a clarifying question, Linnea. Were you asking that specifically about the hospital data or kind of larger picture nationwide? The question came in as Chelsea was sharing the PHQ-9 data.
Yeah, and while we're waiting for that, I definitely think, Chelsea shared some of those trends, when it came to like the bullying that folks are experiencing, the stress that they're experiencing. It used to be that when you went home, right, you could hopefully be able to avoid, having other people be able to have access, to your feelings and how you're doing. But now with kind of online, online social media, it's really hard for people to get away, right? And so bullying through social media is a major issue. And so the question is really, making sure that if we know that somebody's being bullied, or we know that somebody is being, bullied through social media, making sure that if we understand that, trying to support them and make sure that they, have access to resources and support and ways to hopefully be able to avoid or be able to limit that bullying, which includes reaching out to schools about, that type of behavior as it's happening. Any of the other panelists have any other kind of response to that?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit more. I did reply in the Q&A, but I don't know if everyone can see my answer or not. But basically TikTok, yes, it pretty much is a guaranteed to come up in most of my sessions with the patients that I work with. It's a very, very common thing to talk about, and a very common tool that I think a lot of kids use to help themselves deal with stress. It's a distraction. But I am finding that a lot of the kids I work with are pulling from things like TikTok, sort of almost an education on mental health. They are learning a lot of different types of terminology about, certain symptoms related to anxiety, depression, things like that. And so it's definitely providing an education in sort of a good and bad way. It's kind of decreasing, I think, the stigma, which is great. A lot of kids are more open to talking about things, and they're relating to things that they're seeing on TikTok. But I think it's also kind of exasperating some of what may or may not be happening with them. So it's sort of a popular conversation now, especially in friend groups, to talk about mental health and to sort of, to have a therapist and to do things. So there's pros and cons to it, but I don't have any specific, data to support that it's necessarily positive or negative. I think just like anything else in life, it just kind of depends on the person and how they use it, all sorts of stuff.
Great, thank you, Chelsea. And just check in. So somebody just wanted to share a resource called the logoffmovement.org, rethinking social media by teens for teens. And then somebody also had a question about cutting trend. And so one thing that you'll notice in the slides is that we didn't have self-harm or cutting as a warning sign. It can certainly be a warning sign. So with cutting, if you think about it as a Venn diagram, there are people who are cutting or who are self-harming, who are not thinking about suicide. There are people who are thinking about suicide, who are not self-harming or cutting. And then there are people who are harming themselves or cutting, who are also thinking about suicide, which is one of the reasons why it's so important to ask directly about suicide, because that establishes whether you're talking about life or death or not. Which we're going to cover in the next section. But does anybody else have anything that they wanted to add just generally about kind of cutting or self-harm?
Yeah, when it comes to self-harm, it's an individual's way of showing the pain that they might not be able to express with their words, or it might be a release. It might be the only way for them to release pain or energy that they're feeling, or it could be the only way to seek input to get that feeling. And so it's a symptom of an underlying condition. It could be connected to suicide, the way that Toby was describing in that Venn diagram. And so anytime that somebody is cutting, it's very important for them to get professional help to peel back the layer and figure out what is that underlying problem. How do we solve that underlying problem? Because the symptom is the cutting. Suicidal thoughts are a symptom of an underlying problem, or an unsolvable problem to that person, or unbearable pain. And one of the best ways that we can deal with this is to talk about it, to find the words. So Toby, why don't I take over and we'll jump into finding the words. Next slide. So the pieces for finding the words to be able to have these conversations is to start the conversation. It can be a very uncomfortable thing to do. And oftentimes in our culture, we talk around problems, we talk in circles. What we need to do is we need to talk directly. We need to be able to ask the question directly. And then we have to sit in silence. We have to be able to listen. We have to be able to express our concern and reassure these folks, our loved ones, our peers, our coworkers, the neighbors that we're concerned about, strangers. We need to be able to reassure them that hope and help is available. We can create safety plans, get them connected to care. And then there's some things that we should probably not say, or ways that we shouldn't say things. Next slide. All right, so if we're going to start a conversation, an uncomfortable but crucial conversation, we need to be prepared. Having a resource list is going to be huge. So if we knew what the warning signs were that sent off that smoke detector in our head that said something isn't right, then let's try to figure out what resources we might want to have in our back pocket. We can go to Sierra Community House, we can go to TahoeLifeline.org or Nevada County, and we can compile resources that are available. If we're concerned about someone who's cutting, there's a sign. We're going to have this conversation about suicide directly. We want to have some resources, not only for the thoughts of suicide, but also for the signs that we've noticed, like self-harm. You're going to want to practice what you're going to say. One thing that you might consider doing is calling the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. The phone number that Toby gave you guys at the beginning of the training, 1-800-273-TALK. That's a phone number for folks who are themselves thinking about suicide, but also for others who are concerned about suicide. If I were to need to practice a conversation, I can talk with somebody that I trust, or I can talk with someone on the hotline, 24/7, anonymous. They're there to have these types of conversations. They can help you come up with that plan. You want to plan this conversation for a time where neither of you are going to be in a hurry and you can spend time with that person. You want to be able to sit in silence. Next slide, Toby. When we start this conversation, you can bring up the signs that prompted you to ask about suicide. You really want to make sure that it's not just an all of a sudden out of the blue, that you've put a lot of thought into this. You know, Sam, I wanted to spend some time with you. I've noticed that you haven't been acting like yourself lately. I know that you're not sleeping well and you haven't eaten anything for weeks. I'm really concerned about you. You can see that here we've noticed some signs. You've got clear compassion and that there's a timeline in place. It lets that person know that you care, that you've noticed them. And you're going to ask directly about suicide. Sam, I'm concerned about you. Are you having thoughts of suicide? Next slide. So this is establishing that you are willing to take the risk to talk about this taboo topic that's so stigmatized in so many cultures and so many communities and homes, but you're willing to take that risk. You're a safe person to talk to. It's not going to plant the seed into someone's head. That's one of the biggest myths about suicide. We spend so much time talking in circles and hoping that that person is going to pick up what you're trying to lay down. But the fact is that they're in so much emotional pain and they feel like a burden. They feel isolated and all alone. And so if you anticipate that they're somehow going to take a lifeline that isn't direct, we're going to be missing the mark. Next slide. Are you thinking about suicide? It needs to be that direct. This is something that can be really uncomfortable. It can be one of the most intimate things you could ever say to another person. Practice. If we were all together in the same room today, we could turn to our neighbor and we could build that muscle memory by practice saying this out loud. And so I encourage you, when you're alone and when you're ready, to practice this question out loud to yourself in the mirror. Make sure that you're ready to say these words out loud because you want to be able to say it without hesitation, without fear or trepidation. Next slide. If you ask the question, are you having thoughts of suicide? Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about ending your life? The answer could be no, and that's fine. We don't want to be overly relieved. The answer could be yes, and that's fine. We're going to help that person get connected to care. If the answer is yes, we've got some options. If you're concerned that they might act quickly on their thoughts, we don't want to leave them alone until help has arrived. We want to try to stay with them. You can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. This phone number should be programmed into your phone. And the very exciting and hopeful news is that coming this July, that number will be a 3-digit 988. Super easy to remember, but not quite yet. 1-800-273-8255. For someone with thoughts of suicide, for someone who's concerned about someone with thoughts of suicide. You can call this number, put it on speakerphone, and let them manage the conversation. You asked the question, the answer was yes. Now let's all get together and come up with a plan. You can call the county crisis lines, Nevada County 24/7 crisis line, is 530-265-5811. The Placer County 24-hour crisis line for adults is 1-888-886-5401 and 1-866-293-1940 for youth. For in-person help, we have the Crisis Stabilization Unit in Grass Valley. For an emergency, if you're concerned about yourself or for the other person, if an attempt is underway or you just don't feel safe, we need to call 911. And located in Eastern Nevada County is the Mobile Crisis Unit. So if that is available, law enforcement will help coordinate to get mobile crisis over the hill. And wearing your professional hat, you need to know what your organization's policies and procedures are. What are the protocols that you might take if this were a situation that was happening wearing your professional hat at work? Next slide, please.
Hey,
No
Shannon,
matter, yeah.
One question we had is, do they have interpreters on those crisis lines?
The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline has a Spanish phone number, and and it is in the chat, 1-888-628-9454. For the crisis lines, I'm going to Jasmine, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, for the county crisis lines, we use the language line. So it's an interpretation service, but it is available in many languages in addition to Spanish.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So we're having this conversation. We have someone who's just disclosed something that is so intimate and so personal. We have to practice that empathetic listening, sitting in silence. We want to be listening for the reasons that that person has for both living and for dying. We're not here to talk them into living. We want to validate that both of these options are valid. And we really want to highlight that living is still an option for them. This is an opportunity for us to help find out what anchors this person to life. Next slide. Let the person know that you care. And you can show them that by practicing just genuine concern and taking the situation seriously. There's an author by the name of Brene Brown, and she says to her script that I keep in my back pocket is, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad that you told me. Empathetic listening. Next slide. There are cultural and linguistic considerations. There is a big importance of involved decision-making whenever it's possible. We all appreciate to be in control of our own lives. And for somebody who's having a crisis where suicide is an option, giving them decisions where they feel in control can be incredibly helpful. Trust. Communication and language is huge. That helps build trust and helps that person feel anchored to another individual, even if it's just for right now. Help seeking can have some cultural barriers. There are professional supports out there, but we're not going to pretend like they're the easiest to get to all the time. There's all kinds of barriers that are there. Right now, it's sometimes hard to get in to see a professional. And so the more that we can help really directly connect someone to a professional, as well as to informal supports, can make the difference of life and death. And part of this is just being prepared, knowing what's in our community and who to reach out to. Sierra Community House, Nevada, Placer County, the hospital are always available in this community. Next slide. So get help. We have to put that person together with a list of resources, whatever those resources might be. Connect them to the trained helpers. We've got these phone numbers that are in our phones, and they will come back to you again in the follow-up email. Again, call 911 if an attempt is already underway or if you do not feel safe. Next slide.
Before we move on to the next slide, Shannon, there was a question in the Q&A about how are law enforcement trained to handle a mental health crisis. specifically suicidal individuals. I know maybe Shannon or Jasmine want to weigh in there because we're going to talk about the mobile crisis unit soon.
Sure. I'll start. I am on the Chief's Advisory Committee for the town of Truckee, and law enforcement agents are trained in various ways. Most are trained in a 40-hour training called CIT, or the Memphis model. And so a component of that is suicide prevention. I believe that ongoing training, robust face-to-face ongoing training, is something that we could continue to foster and bolster in all communities, especially ours. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jasmine.
So like Shannon mentioned, we have our many different law enforcements in the region: Truckee PD, Placer County Sheriff, CHP, Nevada County Sheriff as well. So they're all trained in crisis de-escalation. They're also trained to do 5150 holds, which is the psychiatric hold, which is required to legally place someone on a hold. And then that allows individuals to be taken to the hospital. Individuals don't always have to be placed on the hold to be taken to the hospital by the police, but it is one strategy if that's needed. And then once the police take that individual to our local emergency department, we have trained crisis specialists that are on call and on staff and are able to intervene one-on-one with that person and or any family members that may be with that person. Then they do a thorough evaluation and come up with a plan, whether it's discharging someone back home to the community with a safety plan, or if it's going to a higher level of care with a psychiatric facility to help that individual stabilize.
Great, thanks. We have another question, kind of a follow-up to that one, which is law enforcement coming to Spanish-speaking homes with an interpreter?
Not to my knowledge, locally in the area.
Great. Well, not great, obviously, but thanks.
Okay. All right. So as Jasmine mentioned, safety planning is huge. We need to come up with a plan to keep that person safe for now. We can ask the person if they have access to any type of lethal means. It might be weapons like firearms. It could be medication. It could be something else. And the way that we want to find that out is not asking, do you have guns in the home? It would be, yes, they've said yes. Are you thinking of taking your life? And then you're going to ask about, do you have a plan? Have you secured anything that you need to act on that plan? We can ask in ways where we're not giving them any ideas, where they are disclosing what their ideas might be. At that point, we could remove those lethal means from the vicinity, from the house. We can reach out to others for help, including law enforcement if you need it. We don't want to put ourselves in danger. So again, if you're worried, you can call 911. When I think about safety planning, I think about taking whatever that means might be, locking it up, limiting access, or removing it from the home until things improve. Next slide.
And just if we could slow it down just a little bit, the interpreters wants to make sure they can keep up.
So we need to create that safety plan together, remembering that having control and being able to make choices, even in this type of crisis, can go a long way to help that person feel connected to life, to feel like they're in power. Ask the person what will keep them safe until they're able to meet with a professional. They might have something that's worked in the past. They might have an idea. Ask the person to refrain from alcohol or drugs or have someone monitor their use until things improve. Next slide. We want to share safety planning resources. There is a formal safety plan where we identify a lot of things like warning signs, risk factors, who their caring contacts might be. And we have access to those safety planning resources on the Tahoe Lifeline website. taholifeline.org/safety-planning. There are also safety planning apps that can be really useful. But typically a person needs to be de-escalated to do that formal type of planning. At this point, if the person is really escalated, we want to just make sure that we have verbal plans and that we are getting them connected to appropriate care. We want that verbal commitment that the person is not going to act on their thoughts of suicide before they've met with a professional. And sometimes that's the best that we can do, is to get a verbal commitment that they won't attempt suicide. Next slide. What not to say. We don't want to ask in any way where we might get no for an answer, right? We don't want to be making that person feel more isolated or more of a burden than what they might already be feeling. So we don't want to say things like, "You're not thinking of killing yourself, are you?" Or this ambiguousness where, "Are you thinking of harming yourself?" Again, we can't talk in circles. We have to be direct. If we were to ask, "Are you thinking of harming yourself?" a person would possibly answer no, because for them, they're already in so much pain that they wouldn't think that harming themselves was equated to killing themselves. Next slide. Don't promise secrecy. This is especially important with our youth. Our young people try to solve each other's problems. They try to do the job that adults should be doing. And so we cannot promise secrecy. We need to make sure that that person gets connected to care. We can promise discretion and thoughtfulness, and we can help them be involved in decision-making whenever it's appropriate. When someone's life is at risk, safety is far more important than that person being upset with you. Making sure that people stay with us to see the next day is much more important than mending hurt feelings. What we can do is we can say things like, "I care about you too much to keep a secret like this." Next slide. Don't tell the person to do it. I know that sometimes we can get frustrated and we can get angry, but this is the most dangerous thing that we could say. If at any point throughout these conversations, we mess up and we stumble, it's okay to make a mistake. We can own it and say, "I didn't mean for it to sound like that. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. I apologize. I'm here for you. I'm listening." The most important thing we can do is to start these conversations and reach out for help. And so with that, I'm going to hand over the controls to Jasmine Bro. She is our program manager for the Truckee-Tahoe Health and Human Services for both Placer and Nevada counties.
Just really quickly, we do have a couple questions. The question is, if someone says to us that the person is considering suicide, can you say something like, "Let's try to find some help before you go that way. You don't lose anything trying." So just in terms of the conversation, if you find out that somebody is thinking about suicide.
Sure. If that is a statement that resonates with that person and the relationship you have with them, absolutely. We're trying to get that person to hold on to life. What is it that really connects them to life at this point? And so if persuading them to just try to access help, I hear what you're saying. I can't imagine how much pain you're in right now. Have you ever spoken with a professional about this? Would you go with me to get help? Can you hang on until we're able to speak with a professional? This would be a great opportunity, if it's appropriate, to pull out your cell phone, call the Lifeline, put them on speakerphone and say, "Hey, I'm here with my buddy, Charlie, and he's really struggling. Charlie, do you want to tell, the operator what's going on? I'm trying to convince Charlie that we need to get him connected to care. Can you help us find a counselor in the area?" I think that statement that you had was a great phrase for the right person to try to convince them that help and hope is available.
Great, thank you, Shannon. And just for folks, we've had a lot of tremendous questions, so I think you can go and look in the answered section. Some of them we're responding to just by typing. but we had a question about, do we have permission to use this presentation for future trainings? You're welcome to share the slides because they have a lot of information and resources. Anybody wants another training, Nevada County Public Health provides them free. We're willing to accommodate any schedule and anything else that folks need. So please feel free to reach out to me if you are interested at all in a training for whether it's one person or a group. Happy to accommodate those. And the question, another question, do you have Spanish presenters? We actually have a few folks who have been trained in Know the Signs who speak Spanish. And so we would love to be able to help organize that for you as well. And Jasmine, I think you're up now. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Toby. You advance the slide, please. All right. Good evening, everyone. So now that we've covered Know the Signs and Find the Words, we'll cover some different options of resources that are available to reach out. Many of them we've already talked about, but we'll be reviewing them again. So understanding who to reach out to in our region can feel confusing and overwhelming because of all the different counties and jurisdictions, but there is help. Depending on your county of residence, your county behavioral health department will offer a 24/7 crisis line. So you can reach out to the county of your residence, and the phone numbers are listed on the slide. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline has a specific veteran option in addition to other special population callers. They have an online chat feature and are available along with additional online resources. So there's many different ways to access information through those options. These crisis lines are all free, and they provide services in English, Spanish, or other preferred languages. Next slide, please. Sierra Community House has a 24/7 community help hotline. They specialize in domestic violence and sexual assault and are well-versed in community resources. And staff are also trained in suicide prevention and crisis intervention. They can link callers in crisis to local community resources that may also include linking them to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, depending on what the needs are. The Trevor Project focuses on resources and support for young people. That's 24/7 through a phone. There's also an online chat or a text option if you go to the website for the Trevor Project. And Trans Life is run by and for trans people. Peer support crisis services are available. The hotline is 24/7, but they do have reduced capacity right now and they're operating on limited hours. There's a website, Trans Life, that has more information online. Next slide, please. The Teen Line runs a hotline of professionally trained teen counselors. So it's a peer-based model who focus on supporting young people, caregivers, and schools. It's not 24/7, but sometimes that approach of having a teen provide the guidance can be really helpful depending on the situation. Next slide, please. So we have a variety of trainings available through our Tahoe Lifeline, and we can put that website in the chat again. Trainings are available and advertised as they become available. Some of the trainings can't be held virtually. I believe currently at the moment we have Safe Talk and Assist cannot be held virtually, but we do have a QPR training available currently on our website. So that's Question, Persuade, and Refer. And that's a 1 to 2 hour training for lay people to identify warning signs and how to respond. Safe Talk is a half-day training. It's very structured and more in-depth. And then the Assist training is a 2-day training, and that's for caregivers, friends, family, or community members that are in a non-clinical role and how to respond to someone who is having thoughts of suicide. Next slide, please. Oh, and then mental health first aid. We talked a little bit about that. So just like you would take a CPR class for a medical response, the mental health first aid is like a CPR medical, but for mental health. So it helps you understand the risk factors and the warning signs for mental health and additional concerns. And it also teaches skills for crisis and non-crisis intervention. Next slide. Let's Talk Nevada County was a campaign that Nevada County started in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. The goal is to build community resiliency, focus on destigmatizing mental health, and offering materials for individuals, family members, and businesses to use to help guide conversations in various settings. And with that, I'm going to introduce Danielle Mills. She is the coordinator for the Tahoe Truckee Suicide Prevention Coalition and works with Sierra Community House.
All right, thank you. And then I think we have, oh, no questions in the chat, just kidding. All right, so yes, I'm Danielle Mills. I am the Suicide Prevention Coordinator for Sierra Community House and the Tahoe Truckee Suicide Prevention Coalition. So a little bit about the coalition. It was formed in 2013, and it was a response to some very concerning trends around youth mental health and youth suicides in the Tahoe Truckee area. One of the biggest things that we want to do, there are actually 3 areas, is we want to educate, we want to do outreach in the community, and we want to strategize with the community. And so one of the main ways we do that is through trainings like this. So far we've trained 5,000 community members in Know the Signs. Like Jasmine mentioned before, we also offer other trainings like QPR, like mental health first aid, and you can find all of that information on our website, which is tahoelifeline.org. As far as outreach goes, one of the biggest events that we do on a quarterly basis is Mental Health in the Mountains, which is where we invite experts in different areas of mental health. So suicide prevention, supporting survivors of suicide loss. During the peak of COVID, we had a doctor come and talk about resiliency during this really difficult time. So just in areas that we feel are really relevant to issues that the community is facing. Another way that we do outreach is we do events like Hike for Hope every year with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And that is exactly what it sounds like. It's a hike where survivors of suicide loss, survivors of suicide attempts, and just community members that want to support their community and suicide prevention efforts come together and hike and just celebrate life and celebrate those that we have lost. We also do other events like tabling at universities and schools, things like that. The coalition is staffed through Sierra Community House, so that's kind of why I wear both hats, so you can find information about the coalition through Sierra Community House as well. And then lastly, our steering committee is made up of a bunch of wonderful community partners, and those are the Community Collaborative of Truckee Tahoe, Nevada County, Placer County, Tahoe Forest Health, the Truckee Tahoe Community Foundation, Sierra Community House, and Sierra College. So representatives of all of those organizations work together to make things like tonight happen. And so we're so grateful for everyone that does that and for everyone that's here tonight. So now I will go ahead and pass it over to Kim Bradley. She is the wellness manager for Tahoe Truckee Unified School District, and she's going to talk about some of the school-based resources that are offered.
Hi, thank you. I'm just doing a quick check on our interpretation. Raina, are you translating? Because we were wondering if it was going through. We couldn't hear anything. Maybe give a thumbs up. Okay, now we can hear you. Oh, it was on mute. Okay, no problem. I just wanted to make sure. It looked like you were translating. So anyway, I'm Kim Bradley and I work with the school district. I'm in our student services department. And I would like to go over some of our services we offer in the schools. For parents who are concerned about your child, the first person to talk to is your school counselor. We have school counselors and psychologists at every school site. We've recently added school social workers and therapists to our middle schools and our high schools. We're really trying to beef up our supports, especially after these last 2 years. It's been really hard being in the pandemic, being in distance learning, being in hybrid, wearing masks. As has it been a strain on all of us, our children and our students are really feeling the impact of that. At most of our school sites, we have coordinated care teams, and that's where we meet weekly with our administration, our counselors, our wellness staff, to be able to talk about students that have been referred and that need extra support. And then we strategize both in school and out of school supports for them. We work really closely with the hospital, with the county, and with all of our community collaborative partners to support students. So it's a great access point to get your student or your family connected into services. We also have wellness centers in our middle schools and our high schools. And that's another access point where students can just walk into the wellness center to talk to someone. They can tell their teacher, hey, I'm actually needing a moment out of class right now, and I just need to be able to reset and help regulate to be able to be in class. And the Wellness Center offer support groups, skill building workshops, and is another connection point to different resources in our community. We also have social emotional learning curriculum at all of our schools. So it really varies. We have a second step curriculum. We also do mindfulness and restorative circles, but we really have been prioritizing how to support students' social emotional well-being in addition to their academics. If you can go to the next slide.
One question, Kim, that just came in. Can charter schools utilize resources in the community?
Yes,
the
the
same
community resources are available to charter schools, to all students. We would have to talk about partnering with our school resources, but certainly all of our community resources are open to all students and families in our community. And then just some other programs we have. We do drug, alcohol, and vape education. Last year, we launched Hope Squads in our middle school and high school. And those are a program where students nominate their peers who are safe, trusted people in their life, and then they get trained in QPR, which is a question, persuade, refer, and other suicide prevention skills so that they can support their friends and be an ally at school. We also do student support groups. We do peer mentor programs. And we work really closely with our Tahoe Forest Hospital Youth Health Navigator. Her name is Lisa Steckert, as well as with Chelsea. We make a lot of referrals to the hospital. And we have a program called What's Up Wellness that does 9th grade mental health screenings at our high schools. We have many other resources, but I just wanted to highlight a few. And just to reiterate that we are really a support for families, and to talk to your counselor, your principal, wellness center staff, and to know that we are here to support you, both to provide school supports as well as get you connected to our outside community resources. And we will be sending this recording and slideshow out afterwards. So if you didn't catch all this, we can include this and you can have the information. And then I can also include my email too, if you'd like to reach out to me and just get more information. I would like to introduce Allison Schwedner, who is the director of the Community Collaborative of Tahoe Truckee, who's going to talk a little bit more about what community resources we have to offer.
Thank you, Kim, and good evening, everybody. Like Kim said, my name is Allison, and I work with the Collaborative, which is comprised of about 45 health, education, and social service organizations. And our role is to really work across all of our partners and bring folks together to address some of the most pressing issues in our community. And certainly behavioral health has been a #1 priority of our Collaborative for a number of years. And like Kim said, I'm just going to quickly review some of the additional community resources. You've all heard about many of them already this evening, but just again, reiterating that there are supports available for our community, whether or not you have a child at Truckee Unified School District, a charter school. If you're not a youth, there's a number of things available. In addition to accessing services through or resources through our website, you can also go to partofournature.org, which is actually a stigma reduction campaign, and also has a whole host of resources available to folks in both English and Spanish. Next slide, please, Toby. And again, I'm just going to review some of the key services available. You've all heard about Sierra Community House already this evening, but just a reminder, Sierra Community House provides a whole host of services ranging from crisis prevention and intervention to hunger relief, family support, which includes parenting classes, legal services. And so we really encourage folks, if you don't know where to go, call the folks at Sierra Community House and they can help you navigate our system of services and ensure that you're getting the support services that you or someone you love needs. Next slide, please, Toby. We also encourage folks to reach out to the hospital. The phone number is at the bottom. The hospital provides psychiatric and therapy services. Chelsea mentioned several of them earlier, as well as medication-assisted treatment for substance use disorders. And the hospital also has a very helpful online directory of therapists in Nevada County, Placer County, as well as Washoe County. So the website is on there as well. So if you're looking for help, we really encourage folks to use this website as kind of a first go-to, just to kind of get a sense of what's out there and who's available to help out. Next slide, please, Toby. We're also really fortunate as a community to have Gateway Mountain Center operate in the Tahoe Truckee area. And so Gateway Mountain Center focuses on nature-based learning, wellness adventures, as well as non-traditional therapeutic approaches to mental health and wellness. And they have three primary programs. The first is called Whole Hearts, Minds, and Bodies, which is a one-on-one nature-based therapeutic mentoring program, really focusing on building authentic relationships with youth and outdoor peak experiences. The next program Gateway Mountain Center operates is called Sierra Experience, which is basically environmental education and adventure programs designed to help youth build connections with nature, themselves, and the broader community. And then the third program that Gateway offers is called Four Roots Wellness Recovery Services. And so they actually have a Four Roots Wellness Center located on Donner Pass Road. It's across the street from where the fire station is. And they offer after-school programming. So they have a weekly peer-led support group called Mindful Warriors. They run a natural high recovery retreat. And then they also run something called MASK or MBSAT, which is mindfulness-based substance abuse treatment program. And they've kind of integrated their own Four Roots wellness philosophy into that and created a MASK program. So we really encourage folks who are needing support with youth to reach out to Gateway Mountain Center. And Toby, I believe the contact information is on the next slide. So again, phone number and email, and we will again be sending out all this information because I recognize it's a lot of phone numbers. Next slide, please, Toby. We also wanted to share the Placer County Chaplaincy with you all. So the chaplaincy provides post-vention support services. So information, resource and referral, general support to those experiencing a suicide loss. So they've been an incredible resource for our community. They also may be requested for immediate response through law enforcement personnel on scene. And again, are often the folks that are called in the aftermath of an unfortunate death by suicide or other tragedies in our community. So they are, again, a significant resource for our community, and we are grateful that they're here. And again, their contact information is at the end of the slide. And the final resource I wanted to share with you all is Friends for Survival. So Friends for Survival is a suicide bereavement support program that offers a number of different types of services, but they offer weekly support groups, a monthly newsletter, educational materials, and community events. We're actually currently looking for a local facilitator for Friends for Survival, but if it's a resource that you're interested in, and we still encourage you to give them a call and email them to see what you can access from up here. So again, that's just a very high level overview of some of the key resources in our community. And again, please look for the follow-up email for specific contact information. And so Toby, I will hand it back to you at this point.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison. The next slide that we wanted to share is just kind of a video. And I think it does a nice job of summarizing a lot of what we shared today as part of the training. in terms of knowing the signs, finding the words, having that difficult but direct conversation with folks, and then connecting them to some of the helping resources that we have in the community. I apologize. The video is only in English, and I also just wanted to apologize. I know people have had kind of challenges throughout with the interpretation, so we'll make sure that we follow up and offer the same training in Spanish after this as well. So apologies for that, but we will start the video, and hopefully, if one of the if someone can give a thumbs up on who's on the panel, that you can hear the sound, that would be great. This is another one of our great technological challenges, is having audio on video show up. So.
I have my ups and downs, just like anybody else.
I guess I can't mute myself while that's going on. Sorry.
Maybe more than anybody else.
I can be hard to figure out.
And I like my privacy. I don't want you looking over my shoulder all the time.
But you know your kid better than anybody else. And if you think he's acting different than usual...
Acting really down, crying all the time for no good reason.
Or getting really mad, not able to sleep, or sleeping too much.
Shutting her friends out or giving her stuff away.
Acting reckless, drinking, using drugs, staying out late.
Suddenly not doing stuff he used to love.
Or doing stuff that's just not like him.
It might be nothing to worry about. It might just be high school.
Or it might be something more. He might be depressed.
Not just feeling down, really depressed.
It might be that your kid is thinking about killing himself. It happens. More than you think. More than it should.
And people say, I had no idea.
I thought it was just a phase he was going through.
I never thought she'd do it.
I wish he'd come to me.
I wish he'd said something.
I wish I'd said something.
When it's too late. So if you think your kid's acting different, if she seems like a different person, say something.
Say, what's wrong? How can I help?
And ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself? It doesn't hurt to ask. In fact, it helps.
When people are thinking about killing themselves, they want somebody to ask. They want somebody to care.
Maybe you're afraid you'll make it worse if you ask. Like, you'll put the idea in their head.
Believe me, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't hurt to ask.
In fact, the best way to keep a teenager from killing herself is to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself?
And what if they say yes?
Or maybe.
Or sometimes.
Well, here's what you don't say.
That's crazy.
Don't be such a drama queen.
You're making too much of this.
That boy's not worth killing yourself over.
It's not going to solve anything.
You're just trying to get attention.
You're not going to kill yourself. What you do say is,
I'm sorry you're feeling so bad. How can I help?
We'll get through this together.
Let's keep you safe.
A lot of people think about killing themselves. Adults and kids. Most of them never try it, but some of them do. So if your kid says,
I'd be better off dead.
I can't live with this.
I'm gonna kill myself. Take her seriously. Find someone she can talk to about it. Someone who knows how to help.
Sometimes kids want to kill themselves because something happened. A breakup, a failure. But sometimes it goes deeper, and it's not going to go away by itself.
Get some help. Talk to your doctor.
Or a counselor at school.
Or your minister.
But don't just let it drop.
And make sure that your kid always has someone to turn to. Someone he trusts.
Make a list together, right then. 3, 4, 5 names.
Put a suicide hotline number on there too.
Have him keep that list in his wallet, so he always knows where to turn.
Make sure your home is safe.
If you have pills she could use to hurt herself, lock them up.
If you have a gun, don't just lock it up. Get it out of the house. The bullets, too.
And one more thing. If you think your kid might be about to hurt himself, don't leave him alone.
Take him to the emergency room.
Call 911 if you have to.
We all have our ups and downs, but sometimes it's more than that.
If you think something's wrong, the only way to find out is to ask.
Ask straight out. Are you thinking about killing yourself?
Don't wait until you're sure. Trust your gut, because it never hurts to ask.
And it can make a big difference. All the difference.
In your kid's life.
All right, so that concludes our training and the presentation. But if folks have any additional questions, feel free to put those in the chat there, or in the Q&A. You can put them in anonymously in the Q&A, or send them to the chat. You can even send them to the hosts and panelists only, if you feel better about that. But we'll hang out right here. There's also still the virtual support room that is available for folks. If after the training you want to connect with somebody looking for additional support, either for you or somebody you're concerned about, please feel free to go there. I will, again, in the chat, copy the link there. They're going to hang out there for about 15 minutes after the training is over. So if folks want to connect with them there, that would be great. Any additional questions? Somebody asked if the video had subtitles. I don't know. Do folks know if the YouTube video offers subtitles, or is it just closed caption?
I haven't seen it. It came from the Mayo Clinic and I haven't seen it subtitled.
Okay. So we have a question here. What can you do if you know the person is threatening it in the moments of despair and then refuses to discuss it after? If the person is over 18, is there any action you can take? If somebody is talking about suicide or threatening to die by suicide, and then they don't want to discuss it afterwards, or they don't want to acknowledge it afterwards, the key is to have that conversation that Shannon talked about. Obviously it takes somebody else engaging with you, right? And we can't make decisions for people at every moment. But for instance, if somebody is threatening it and you're, you can always reach out to, like in Eastern Nevada County, there is a mobile crisis team if you want to involve them. 911 is an option as well. Whenever there's somebody who's thinking about suicide, sometimes they're willing to go along with an intervention, or they're willing to get support. And then in other situations, they may not be willing to. And so you, as the person who cares about that person, needs to make a decision about, involving folks, even if that person does not want to. But like in a general sense, if somebody is doing that and they refuse to talk about it, trying to engage with that person and letting them know why you're trying to engage, because you care about them deeply, because you want to make sure that they're safe, and that if maybe they're not experiencing thoughts of suicide at that moment in time anymore, but in case it does happen again, you want to make sure that they have a safety plan in place so that they know what the resources are that they can reach out to if they are thinking about suicide, and maybe they don't have you, or they don't have other people around to connect with. So that would be kind of, it can be really challenging if somebody's not willing to engage in an intervention. And that's kind of the point where you need to decide whether you want to pull in things, against somebody's will or not, whether that's engaging with 911 or the mobile crisis unit, taking them to the emergency department. But generally just having that conversation. Is there anything that anybody else would add to that in response to that question? It's a great quick question, right?
I would just add that, making changes and, so when you say the person threatens suicide and then later they don't want to discuss it, change takes a long time for people. And what you can control is continuing to be there for that person. They don't have to discuss it with you, but you can say, I really care about you. And I saw that you were really upset and you wanted to take your life. Even offering reflections and continuing to reinforce that you're there for them is such a powerful tool. Even if they don't want to engage, you're there when they are ready to, and you're there to take the next step if safety is a concern.
Thanks, Jasmine.
And to just add on to that, it absolutely opens the door, because sometime down the road, they could turn back to you and remember that you were that trusting person that was capable of talking about this topic. And if you are concerned about their safety, asking law enforcement to do a welfare check is an option. You just have to kind of weigh out safety in that. If it's really low level, it could create more discomfort than it would create safety. And that would be a great thing to call the suicide prevention hotline and share your concerns and ask them to help you come up with a plan. In a situation like that, a lot of people are afraid that the hotline is going to deploy law enforcement agents. And that's just not the case. That would be a great opportunity to call them, talk through the risk factors, the warning signs, the history, your relationship, to figure out a good plan of action.
I was also just add to that I commonly hear, especially with youth, that they are contemplating suicide because they feel like they're a burden on others. And so, just, not only asking the direct question, but also letting that person know that they have value in your life and that their life is worth saving, I think is also really important and can be really impactful.
Great, thank you guys so much. We have one question, which is any thoughts or insight on why private therapy therapists are so difficult to find, or why many won't take insurance?
I can speak a little to that. I mean, unfortunately, we live in a community with a lot of wealth and a lot of disparities. And it is much easier for a therapist to take self-pay than to need to comply with insurance. There's a lot of challenges navigating insurance as a private practitioner, and often private therapists are a one-person show and they don't have the support for administrative tasks and billing. There are some insurance reforms specifically within Medi-Cal that are happening that are intended to make the process easier for therapists to bill. One option, because we do have limited therapists in our region that take insurance, another option is to contact your insurance company directly. With telehealth and COVID, there's a lot more telehealth therapists available that are outside of our region. I know that that's often not ideal for a telehealth therapist. However, that is another option that has been expanded since COVID for our region.
And to add on to that, this is not just a Truckee-Tahoe issue. All across the country, people are facing that. There's a huge demand for counseling. And so we're not the only ones in that boat. And I know that there's a lot of people who are trying to come up with creative solutions to address the growing demand.
Thank you. That is it for the questions in the Q&A and the chat. It's a few minutes after 8 o'clock. So I just wanted to extend a huge thank you to our panelists for being here, for all of your support, to the Truckee-Tahoe Suicide Prevention Coalition, all of its members, for having this training. Thank you to all of you who attended. We really appreciate it. Apologies again that we had some technical difficulties with the interpretation. A massive thank you to both Raina and Coco for interpreting and plowing through the technological difficulties that were thrown in their way to provide access to folks. So really appreciate that. We will be sending an email with the slides in both English and then a translated version in Spanish as well, in addition to some of the resources that we discussed tonight. So you'll have access to that. So look for those. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me after the email that I send to you. If anybody's interested in any trainings for any organizations you're part of, or just small groups from 1 to hundreds of people, we'd be happy to do these Know the Signs trainings, because really this is the best way that we can share information about knowing the signs and finding the words and reaching out to help folks in our community who are struggling. So thanks so much. I see a few more things in the chat. And just thank you. So no additional questions. So thanks everybody. And we will get a Spanish language version of the training scheduled as well, to make sure that we can do that the right way as well. So thanks everybody. Take care. Oh, we did have one question before we end about if there are any training certificates. We don't have any CEUs or anything like that associated with this. Some of the other trainings do have that, so I would look into those trainings and getting certificates that way. I know that in some organizations or entities, there's like a form that people can fill out, you know, and if that's the case, we'd be happy to think through whether we're able to do that for folks. I don't know if anybody had any additional thoughts on that.
I just suggested taking the QPR online to receive a certificate. It'll just kind of reinforce. Question, persuade, refer is very similar to know the signs, find the words, reach out.
For sure. And then I know that Danielle earlier put in a link. There are open slots for free attendance to a QPR training as well. So if people are interested in that, connect with one of us. We're happy to get you a free slot in one of those trainings coming up. And Danielle just put it in the chat right there. Great teamwork, guys. All right, thanks everybody. I'll hang out here for a second just in case any other questions trickle in, but really appreciate everybody and we'll talk to you guys soon.